Good morning, Asia, and good evening, America. Welcome to the Great Korean Foreign Policy Debate, Part 3. I'm Bill Overholt from Harvard's Kennedy School. In Parts 1 and 2, I interviewed the national security advisors from the two major parties. Those interviews are posted on YouTube, and the links you can find under your Zoom chat function. Today, I will interview the presidential candidate from the third party, the People's Party. Because he is the presidential candidate, we will also address some domestic issues. These interviews are organized by Harvard's Mosavar Rahmani Center for Business and Government and co-sponsored by the Korea program of Harvard's Belfer Center and Harvard's Ash Center. The Korea project, led by John Park, develops creative approaches to security challenges on the Korean Peninsula. The Ash Center has major Asia programs and a program on innovative improvements to democracy. I want to reiterate some introductory comments from earlier sessions about the importance of South Korea. It lies at the confluence of all the major power influences and conflicts in Asia. South Koreans now have higher incomes than Japanese and better infrastructure than Americans. South Korea has a bigger military budget and a more practiced military than Japan. And they have an exceptional democracy with two vigorously competing major parties, openness to new leaders, openness to new parties, openness to new ideas. South Korean society and politics are as polarized as America's, but they've managed to avoid the threats to democracy that have recently appeared in the United States. Today, I will be speaking with Dr. Ahn Cheol Soo, the presidential candidate of the People's Party. He has a remarkably diverse and different background for a political leader. Trained as a physician, he founded Korea's leading internet security firm. He has been chairman of the board of POSCO, one of the world's leading steel firms. He has served as dean of the Seoul National University's Convergence School of Science and Technology. Dr. Ahn's comments will be translated from Korean into English by his own interpreters. Please click on the globe icon at the bottom of your screen to choose the language that you prefer. Dr. Ahn, welcome. You've positioned yourself as the science and technology candidate and a candidate who's actually run a company. What distinctive domestic and foreign policies will achieve your goals?
제 가장 중요한 원칙은
Well, my most important principle is autonomy, pragmatism, and peace. So my stance is a responsible diplomacy based upon autonomy, pragmatism, and peace. And I also have 5 core principles. Of course, it's about putting national interest first and also upholding the principles of democracy and upholding the norms and principles of international order, also mutual benefits and reciprocity. These are my 5 core principles in terms of diplomacy.
Thank you. You said your foreign policies would lean heavily toward the United States. You would join the Quad Working Group. You would repudiate President Moon's 3 promises to China, namely that that Korea will refrain from further THAAD anti-missile deployments, that it will not participate in further anti-missile networks, and that it will not join a US-Korea-Japan alliance. Won't repudiating those policies bring severe economic retaliation from China? How can Korea balance its security connection to the United States with its economic dependence on China?
저는 현재 문재인 정부의
Well, President Moon's diplomacy is unprincipled, in my opinion, which is why it does not align with our national interest. That is why for each sector and each area, I believe that we need to set up strong principles, and we need a principle-based diplomacy, which is going to help us be strong and withstand any external threats and turmoil. To be a bit more specific, regarding President Moon's 3 no's policies, I believe that that goes against our own sovereignty, which is why for each of the 3 no's or the 3 promises President Moon has made to China, I don't actually agree with these 3 agreements. I believe that Korea needs to stand on its own 2 feet and make its own decisions about China, not leave it up to China. We cannot hand over the decision-making power to China. It needs to be on our own terms. For example, among the 3 no's, there is a policy of refraining from further THAAD missile deployments. Then in that sense, just because I'm opposed to this, it does not mean that I'm okay with, or I'm a proponent of deploying further THAAD missile deployments. For me, what it is about, we need to create a stronger foundation for us and create a better dynamic, and then make the decisions about whether or not to go ahead.
Thank you. Given your intention to lead more strongly to the United States, are you bothered by President Biden's year-long delay in nominating an ambassador to Korea, and by President Trump's cavalier transactional attitude toward the alliance? Can Korea afford to rely on an ally who behaves that way?
저는 현재 문재인 정부가 그 한미 동맹에 대해서
The President Moon administration's stance on ROK-US relations is actually counterproductive. And I believe that there are a lot of things that don't align, which is why I believe moving forward that we need to ground our diplomacy moving forward in ROK-US alliance, and therefore strengthen our alliance moving forward.
Thank you. You've called for a new approach to trade agreements as part of your focus on science and technology. How will that work?
지금 현재 전 세계를 변화시키는
Well, across the world, there is a sea change that is triggered by 3 mega trends, in my opinion, which is the following. First of all is the COVID-19 pandemic. The second is the 4th industrial revolution. And last but not least is the US-China hegemonic power struggle regarding science and technology. So against that backdrop, This is an unprecedented horizon that we are seeing right now. A few days ago, I was talking with a diplomat in Korea, and what we were talking about was about how they actually hired an engineering doctor with a PhD with an engineering degree. And I asked them, why did you hire someone with that degree? And they actually said that everything now caters towards science and technology. We need to know about science and technology, whether it be vaccines or understanding the supply chain for semiconductors, so on and so forth. So everything comes down to science and technology, which is why we believe that science and technology needs to be the basis for diplomatic decisions as well. So with that said, I believe that diplomacy, science and technology, economics, security, these four areas are actually not siloed and actually need to be integrated. And I think that is the trend that is going on. These are not single elements. These are all tied in together. This is the biggest change in the global scene.
So domestically, South Korea's economy is dominated by giant conglomerates. They're the source of many of Korea's extraordinary successes. They also limit competition at home, and they've created an environment where foreign companies find it particularly difficult to invest in South Korea. Is this a problem that needs to be addressed? Would your country's scientific and commercial development be greater if the economy were more competitive?
저는 대한민국 산업 구조가
Well, I believe that the industrial structure in Korea has led us to success up until this point. But in order for us to move forward, to further advance, I believe that the industrial structure itself needs to be overhauled. Up until now, we have been heavily reliant in terms of resource allocation, so on and so forth, in a very handful of conglomerates. But that is no longer going to take us forward because it's no longer sustainable. It's actually going to hold us back. So rather than relying just on one or two major conglomerates, we need to focus on the slew of networks, suppliers, partners, companies within that network. So creating an ecosystem conducive to all of these other businesses is our solution moving forward. And in that sense, I want to propose three keywords: freedom, fairness, and a social safety net. Companies need to have the freedom to be self-sufficient, be autonomous, and really unleash their creativity. And we need a fair system, a fair ecosystem that rewards meritocracy and merits. And we need a social safety net that allows people to get back on their feet after failure. With the United States, it's not the case, but in Korea, we don't have a proper direction for this. For example, the government sometimes restricts freedom. There are regulatory issues. And regarding fairness as well, fair competition is not always guaranteed. Regarding the supervision and control of trying to create this type of fair competitive environment, I don't think that we have been at our best. So that is why I believe that we need to make changes in these three areas.
Thank you. You have said that you would create 5 new super companies to lead in key technologies. How would that work?
그 아이디어는
Well, that idea is actually based on the fact that Samsung semiconductor business has been #1 in the world throughout the past 3 decades. So in my discussions with a lot of employees at Samsung, we began talking about the super gap, which means that the gap between the #1 player and #2 player, if it's small, then that ranking can always change. But if there is a super gap, then there is just one number one company. It is quite unchanging as time goes by. That is why I believe in the next administration, we need to focus on the companies that are among the leading companies in the world, but aren't yet the number one. So we want to focus on those companies to create that super cap. And we want to ultimately have 5 major global companies with 5 major super gap technologies that undergird them in Korea. And that will be the foundation for us to join the ranks of the G5 or the G5 economic powerhouses in the world. That is what I aspire towards and what my number one commitment is. So I call it the 555 strategy.
Is improvement of the role of women in Korea important for the economy as well as for its own sake? Over the years, I've noticed that gender issues have a substantial role in Korean politics. In the 1970s, high-level international conferences all ended with a senior Blue House official taking the participants to a Kisang party. Korean women got rid of the Kisang parties. Today, the controversy is over the Me Too movement. That movement has engendered quite a backlash from some men. The wife of one of the competing candidates even said that the Me Too movement is caused by liberal men not paying for their sex. Does the role of women need to change? What would you do?
예, 우선은 저희
Well, that's a very good question. To start off, I would like to give you some background information about the situation in Korea back in the 1950s. So 70 years ago, actually, the per capita GDP in Korea was only at $100. But now look where we are, fast forward 70 years, and we are now at $300,000 at per capita GDP. And so we are the only company to have achieved this type of transition and feat. And so that has also brought with it a societal change. Those who were born in the 1950s when Korea was a low-income country, and those who were born in Korea when Korea is a wealthy country at where we are now, are living together. So people in different generations who were born to different generations are now living in the same society, which gives rise to conflicts between generations. And with that said, a different perspective on gender issues as well. You talked about the Me Too movement, and I believe that the Me Too movement is an outgrowth of this type of change in society. I think it is also a testament to the direction of change the Korean society has taken, and I think it's the right direction of change.
Back to geopolitics. Today's greatest danger to Asian peace might be US-China tensions over Taiwan, possibly even more dangerous than the issue of North Korean nuclear weapons. How should South Korea deal with the Taiwan problem? In the event of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan, the United States might want to move troops based in Korea, American troops, to support Taiwan. Should South Korea accept US redeployment of its troops in Korea to a Taiwan conflict?
네, 그게 저희들이 지금 고민하고 있는 시나리오 중에 하나입니다.
So that crisis is definitely a scenario that we are thinking about right now, and is definitely an area of concern. And the Ukraine crisis, for example, if a war were to happen, the US forces would definitely be concentrated in that region. But right now, the United States cannot have a military presence that big and wage war in two different regions. So, knowing that China could invade Taiwan, and if that occurs, the US forces in Korea could be deployed to that area. I think that is the gist of the question. So my answer to that is that peace and stability in Taiwan is not as only essential to the East Asian area, but also has direct bearing on international peace and stability. And of course, this is an assumption and it's just a scenario, but as I've said, the principles of autonomy, pragmatism, and peace, upholding the national interest and the ROK-US alliance is going to be my stance.
Thank you. The other big security risk in Asia is North Korean nuclear weapons. How would you deal with those? Many years of severe sanctions have not weakened that nuclear weapons program. And now North Korea is developing and deploying much more threatening missiles. On the other hand, President Trump's historic summits and his declaration that he was in love with Kim Jong-un also failed. How would you bring that arsenal under control?
예, 저
Thank you for that question. The North Korean nuclear issue is a problem, but I believe that we should not accept North Korea as a nuclear state. Before denuclearization processes take place, I also believe that we should keep in place these strong sanctions, and a strong ROK-US alliance and international cooperation and coordination should keep these sanctions in place. The President Moon's administration is talking about declaring an end to the Korean War before entering into six-party talks or peace talks, and I am strongly opposed to that stance, and I've made my position very clear. We need to have a final target that we are moving towards, and the end of the declaring an end to the war can be a means to an end, but it is not the end in and of itself. I don't think that moving towards that goal is the best way.
You've said that you don't want US nuclear weapons stored in South Korea, but you've called for a nuclear sharing agreement between the US and South Korea. How would that work?
그게 저 지금 현재 유럽의
Well, I was thinking of a different concept compared to NATO. Right now in the Europe, whether it be Germany or other countries, there are strategic nuclear weapons that have been deployed and are stationed. But if within South Korean territory, strategic nuclear weapons were to be deployed, that would actually be accepting or recognizing North Korea's status as a nuclear state. That is why directly deploying strategic nuclear weapons wouldn't be the best way. Rather than that, sharing the nuclear weapons that are stationed in Okinawa, for example, and other areas in Japan, they're sharing that and really making use of and employing the nuclear umbrella is the best way moving forward. So that was the idea that I had in proposing the nuclear sharing agreement between the US and South Korea.
So would South Korea have some control over the nuclear weapons in Okinawa or Guam?
예. 저는 그게 한국이 독자적으로
I wasn't saying that Korea should have proprietary right to use those nuclear weapons or arbitrary right. If needed and if need be, if the situation arises in negotiation with and in talks with the United States, they could act as a deterrence under the nuclear umbrella to the nuclear threat from North Korea.
I see. North Korea and China have indicated that the path toward control of the North's nuclear weapons requires denuclearization of the whole peninsula. They seem to mean taking away the US nuclear umbrella as well. How would you control North Korean nuclear weapons if South Korea is gaining more nuclear capability?
그래서 제가 바로 직전 답변에서 말씀드린 것처럼
Well, that ties in with my answer to your former question. That is why I am not for bringing strategic nuclear weapons into South Korean territory. Right now, utilizing the nuclear umbrella provided by the US, we have some level of protection that is being provided, but strengthening the cooperation for that nuclear umbrella is what I am trying to propose. Nuclear weapons are only existent in North Korea, not in South Korea. So I actually don't agree with the phrase denuclearizing the Korean peninsula. I believe that it's denuclearizing North Korea.
Yeah. How do you see North Korea? In the West, many people see it as a fearsome tiger building nuclear weapons to threaten and even take over South Korea. Some very high-ranking intelligence people in Washington took that view a few years ago. Others see it as a nearly helpless mouse with an economy 2% the size of South Korea's, no real friends, and a conventional military that's pretty hopeless despite large numbers. In that view, Pyongyang needs nuclear weapons because that's all they have. How do we think about dealing with a mouse that has a giant tiger head?
네, 그것이 지금 현재 대한민국 그리고 또
Well, South Korea and the entire world is actually focusing on this issue. And this is an immense challenge. COVID-19 pandemic and different sanctions across the world are actually a hindrance to North Korea, of course. And so denuclearizing North Korea requires bringing North Korea to the table for denuclearization talks. So I think it's about how long North Korea can actually wait this out. And I believe that rides on China. Currently, North Korea receives a wide range of support from China. Of course, right now, I don't think that's the case anymore. But in the past, China has been a big sponsor of North Korea. So denuclearizing North Korea requires China's cooperation as well. And of course, international cooperation. And North Korea has dedicated almost 100% of its resources to developing its nuclear power, which is why it has sidelined all of the other sectors. And so it is a very imbalanced country where it is at right now. So with that said, if the denuclearization process goes smoothly, and if we can implement an internationally a phased approach to opening up North Korea, I believe that an international consortium can help out the situation. The Kaesong Industrial Complex is currently closed, but once it is opened, before, when it was opened, it was just the two Koreas that operated this Kaesong industrial complex. So North Korea could, at its free will, close down the Kaesong industrial complex. But if an international consortium is created and different countries invest in that Kaesong industrial complex, for example, North Korea can't just shut it down of its own accord. So normalizing these processes and the situation is my goal.
Do you have an idea how we could bring China into negotiations? In the past, it's often played a very constructive role along with the United States, but now with the US-China confrontation, it's very difficult to get the United States and China to work together. Is there some way South Korea can make that happen?
저는 한국이 그 중재할 수 있는
Well, I think that Korea can act as a mediator. As I said before, one of the major mega trends in the world right now is the hegemonic struggle between the two countries, US and China, over science and technology, which in turn means that the country with hegemonic power in science and technology can dominate the world. That is the essence of why this struggle is going on. And South Korea is now a powerhouse in semiconductors, but if we can branch out, for example, to other areas, to secondary batteries or nuclear power plants and hydrogen power in creating a hydrogen economy, we can find areas where we can excel in soft power undergirded by technology. Then we can become a country that is a necessity to both US and China, a country that is needed by both countries. So that is why I believe that South Korea, based on its technological power and what it will develop moving forward, can be of great help by us actually having this strong science and technological power can actually be a contributor to peace and in resolving the struggle between the US and China.
Thank you. Thinking further about North Korea, Kim Jong-un promised his people a change of national priorities to emphasize the economy more as compared with the military. And he tied that to a peace and nuclear deal with foreign countries. After that failed, does he have any ability to try again? Will his military and his party say, look, you tried that before, it doesn't work? Will domestic political pressures prevent another try? Is it possibly a waste of time to reach out to him again? Or alternatively, are they in so much difficulty that this is a good time to try again?
지난번 미국의 트럼프 대통령과 김정은 회담
The US DPRK summit meetings made something extremely clear, that the DPRK would retain its nuclear power and get concessions from the US, and that the DPRK will not expand its nuclear power, but will maintain what it has now. But that has not gone by. It's not been accepted by the US. And the And North Korea currently maintains that stance with ICBMs or SLBM test launches, so on and so forth, to actually showcase its nuclear power. But despite all of these threats, I believe that economic sanctions based on international cooperation needs to be maintained. It should not be lifted in any way. Maintaining these sanctions and persuading North Korea to come to the table is something that we need to maintain.
If the COVID pandemic and the agricultural problems and other problems of North Korea lead to a great humanitarian crisis in North Korea, would you want to provide aid to them as possibly a way of saying, look, we can deal with you and you can deal with us?
저는 지금 현재 경제 제재와
The current economic sanctions that are in place and the humanitarian aid for North Korea are two different stories, in my opinion. Right now, the North Korean administration or regime is what controls the nuclear power, but it's the people of North Korea that are suffering because of the pandemic, because of the agricultural issues, sometimes even starving to death. And if that's the case, then humanitarian aid should be provided. I think that is the good choice.
Turning from the North to Japan, for many years, alliance unity in dealing with China has been disrupted by tensions between South Korea and Japan, with Japan denying a lot of the things that happened in World War II and South Korea wanting some additional reparations. You have said that conflicts over history should be separated from progress on economic relations. How would that work?
예, 저는 지금 여러 가지 역사 문제와 경제
Of course,
문제
there are a lot of historical issues and a lot of economic issues as well that are currently making the bilateral relations between Korea and Japan even more complicated and complex. And the Korea-Japan relations have reached its epitome of how bad they are in the past few decades. Back in 1989, President Kim Dae-jung of South Korea and Obuchi in Japan released the Kim Dae-jung-Obuchi statement. And I believe that we need to go back to that philosophy and spirit of 1989. Since Japan also has a new prime minister and South Korea as well, in May of this year, we'll have a new administration. I think it will be a great opportunity for a fresh start to cooperate and try to go back to the philosophy of 1989. But actually a hurdle to that is the compensation issue. The Supreme Court of South Korea has been reviewing the World War II issues, and the final ruling was that compensation needs to be made. Of course, the Supreme Court's ruling cannot be overturned, but the one that executes all of this is the administration's office. So what I think needs to happen is we need to put our heads together with Japan, talk together to come up with a solution rather than demanding in a one-sided way. So that is why I propose a two-track approach, that is separating historical issues and economic issues to restore Korea-Japan relations.
will Japan accept that? My understanding is that when Korea has proposed talks about a quiet settlement, that it's been difficult to even get meetings with the appropriate Japanese.
아, 그래서 그 부분에 대해서는
Yes, regarding that issue that you've just pointed out, that is why I talked about the new administrations that will be coming into office. I think it's a good opportunity to get a fresh start going with new administrations in both two countries. The governments of Korea and Japan right now have actually been exploiting the bilateral relations for political purposes. And that has exacerbated the situation between Korea and Japan. That is why I would like to adhere to the principle that regarding diplomatic issues, we should never exploit it for short-term, near-term, or any small national interest. In politics, internal politics should never impede diplomatic issues.
I hope we could get some of our American legislators in Washington to accept that principle. We have a lot of problems in my country with that. President Biden is promoting an alliance of democracies and a stance of ideological confrontation with China. South Korea and America share a devotion to democracy, but South Korea's history is complicated. Park Chung-hee's dictatorship saved South Korea from what was then an economically and militarily superior North Korea. Then democracy was built on the educated middle-class society that Park created. Taiwan and Singapore had similar experiences. There are many countries that don't yet have that educated middle-class society. Should South Korea join the US in a crusade for democracy in every society at every level of development?
저는 한국이 그 전 세계 지금
Well, I believe that South Korea is a good model to all developing countries across the world. Normally, what you see is in the beginning of industrialization, you succeed in industrializing the country and you have a very strong middle class that is formed based on that industrialization. And then a democracy comes around. That was the history of Korea. And in particular, industrialization was state-led. So injecting a huge amount of resources that the country has into strategic industries. So I believe this serves as a very good example and model to other developing countries. And I believe that this should serve as the basis for advancing our relations with our allies and friends.
In West Germany, conservatives and progressives agreed to jointly pursue a policy called Ostpolitik toward East Germany. Ostpolitik just meant change through rapprochement. Didn't matter which party led the country, didn't matter if East Germany did some very negative things. When the time came, because of this, West Germany was perceived very well in East Germany, and the East decided to unite with the West. Is there any chance that parties in South Korea could create a South-South common policy toward North Korea?
예, 우선은 첫 번째로 말씀드리고 싶은 점은
Well, thank you for that question. I would like to first point out that every time there was a change between the conservative and progressive party in the administration, our North Korean policy has done a 180, completely changed. That is why a systematic and institutionalized diplomatic stance has been impossible. That is why I believe moving forward from this administration, I don't think it should be just about the ruling party and their stance on North Korea. The ruling party needs to work with the opposition party to establish and create mid to long-term stances and policies towards North Korea. So a bipartisan effort and agreement would go a long way towards establishing consistency, uniformity across administration changes. And the second point I would like to make is this. I actually was a visiting scholar in Munich for about a little over a year in my past. So when West Germany and East Germany was being unified back then, there were experts that were at that table of peace talks, and I had the opportunity to learn from and talk to these people when the Berlin Wall came down and Germany was unified. It was a success, and back then, people believed that we could use that same model and replicate that in Korea. But it's been quite a long time since Germany has been unified, so times are changing, a lot has changed, which means that the success factors that helped Germany unify are at times no longer effective and therefore are not going to apply to the Korean situation. The East-West Germany and North-South Korea each had their differences. For example, in Germany, a unification was achieved within a matter of 45 years, but now the two Koreas have been separated for about 75 years. So we have been separated for a longer time, which means that culturally and societal differences have increased throughout that time. And secondly, unlike East and West Germany, we have fought each other. The fact that a civil war happened is quite heart-wrenching in Korea. It's a scar of sorts and a pain that we cannot forget. And third, unlike East Germany, North Korea has developed its own nuclear weapons and continues to advance its nuclear power, which makes things even more difficult. And fourth, when Germany was unified, the economic difference between the two was about 1 to 4. So even if it did place some strain or stress on the countries, a systematically unification was possible. But right now, the two Koreas are so different in their economic power. In fact, we in South Korea have almost a 40-fold economy of what North Korea has, which is why systematically reunifying the two countries is much more difficult than what happened with Germany. And another thing I would like to point out is that back before Germany was reunified, people could actually cross the border and people knew about each other. They could talk to each other and information exchange did happen. So it wasn't a complete seal off like we see between the two Koreas. But right now we are completely cut off. North Korea is completely caged. And so there is no exchange that is happening. So because of all of these 5 reasons, it's not possible to apply the German model of reunification to Korea, and we need our own model for reunification.
You mentioned the problem of North Korea policy changing 180 degrees every 5 years because South Korea's parties are so divided. Like the US, South Korean politics and society are very polarized. Is that Korea's greatest weakness? As long as Koreans are united, they can balance the US and China. But if they are vulnerable to being divided, then Korea can be manipulated. You've got a new party that isn't part of the old polarization, and there's a new generation coming up in Korea that it often has some very different ideas from the older generation. Is there a chance here to bridge the polarization of Korean society?
저는 그게 지금 현재 대한민국
Yes, you've made a very good point. I believe that that is the task that we need to tackle. That is the task of of the era. The political system in South Korea used to be a single party government. Of course, there was an opposition party, but it really didn't have any actual power substantially. But after democratization in 1987, in 1887, there has been some changes, and that has brought about its respective challenges. So these two parties are now standing, and both are strong, and they have such different ideas. And the people don't agree with their stance because they think differently. And the parties don't take into consideration and don't want to hear these different opinions. I believe that South Korea shouldn't have a two-party system, but a multi-party system. And to become a multi-party system, we need the institutional basis that allows for that. For example, I want to give you two examples. First of all, the National Assembly voting or congressman voting is a very small gathering, for example. And I believe that we need a proportional system in the National Assembly.
해서 한 선거구에서 국회의원을 지금
So that right now we only have National Assembly members that are picked from one district, but I believe that we need 3 to 5, for example, congressmen picked from districts. This would allow for a multi-party system. And at the presidential election, I believe that we need a decisive vote, and that decisive ballot will help out this bipartisan polarized issue.
Thank you. Well, we've covered a lot of ground and talked about a lot of difficult and complicated issues. Do you have some final thoughts that you would like to leave with our viewers about the overall strategy of yourself and your party?
예, 지금 저는 대한민국이 역사적
Well, I believe Korea is right now standing at the crossroads, at a very critical juncture. If you look at Korea, compared to its economic scale, the way of thinking, especially the political parties and political realms, most of them don't have the globalized way of thinking. So they only look at each other. They continuously are engaged in the inner conflict, and they don't understand what is happening outside Korea. There is a Korean proverb which I'd like to share with you. There's a saying that we are frog inside well, but I believe the political parties and the politicians are in a much worse situation. They are not inside well, but they are inside cave. So they are all frogs inside cave. At least frogs inside well, they can look at the sky. But if you are frogs inside a cave, they cannot see the sky. They cannot see what is happening outside the cave itself. So I believe now is a time to transform such situation. That is what the main reason why I have engaged in the political world. And instead of having these two mega parties, I am determined to create multi-party system. I'm doing my best. And the reason why I'm running for a presidential candidate is also that reason. And instead of making a binary choice of either, so casting a vote for the either of the mega party presidential candidate, I hope that we can achieve the multi-party system, because if we choose the binary way, then we can never overcome the polarizations. And also when a nation and the people are divided, then we can never overcome the crisis. I have never seen a country which were able to overcome the crisis when the people are divided. So should I become the president? And definitely, I'd like to encompass all the political parties and achieve the conciliation. My model is exactly the same as the President Macron of France. And I'm doing and working hard to achieve that goal. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. That's a very incisive set of views. We're honored to have this discussion with you. So along with the viewers, I thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Yeah.